So, with my completion of The Other Side of Dawn by John Marsden, that's number 7, and I have now completed the entire Tomorrow When the War Began series. I read them back to back. I pretty much picked up the first one, and then I just kept reading until I had them all done. It was a ride, I've got to say. Whole pile right here. I might do a video talking about the series as a whole, I'm not sure. But as regarding The Other Side of Dawn, by now anyone who's going to watch this, there's spoiler galore if you haven't read it, then you probably definitely don't want to be listening to this video. So we start with our guerrilla, Werrowee guerrillas, all six of them sitting around in their bushland hideout, and New Zealand Colonel Finley, I think it is, has communicated with them that they're about to start a major intensive battle to oust the invaders of Australia, and he sends in an expert to teach them how to use various kinds of plastic explosives and to talk to them about targets and so forth. This guy airlifts in with helicopter, and around about this time the area surrounding Hal, which is their hideout, becomes very, very hot. Soldiers find it. Some of them try to go down into the valley after them. And of course all of our teams say they're happy to do whatever they can to harass the enemy, to support the war effort, but they've got the ferals as they call them, the kids from Stratton with them, and Ali makes it as a condition for her participation that they go to New Zealand. So when the helicopter comes back, the youngest boy, Jack, I think he's portrayed as about 5, and the 2 girls get into it, but the older boy, Gavin, who's about 10, he hangs back and he refuses to go. So he's with them as they start their objectives, as they're given the go-ahead via radio, and they start creating mayhem. They're very good at mayhem by now. So one of their first objectives is a service station, a petrol station, which appears to be part of the major route of getting soldiers from Werrowee or possibly Cobblers Bay up the road to a city of, I think they call it Cavendish, which is their ultimate target. This is possibly the darkest of the books, and there's some bad stuff in there, and it's pretty horrible in places. It's a fitting end to the series, but it's kind of unique in that as they do the attack on the service station, Ali is separated from her companions, and the rest of the book is her on her own. She gets away from there by catching a ride on a train, and they'd previously scoped out the train lines. While she's on the train, she has to kill a soldier who's following her, and then she basically sabotages the train and explodes. She's unable to escape from this event, however. She's captured by soldiers that shoot her in the leg, and they beat her quite harshly. I don't know how young a young adult you'd want to be before this would get too hard. It's definitely a little bit too hard for younger teenagers, maybe mid-teenagers if they're susceptible. Older young adults, I suppose, would be fine with it. I guess it just depends on the individual and how much bad stuff they're into and willing to put up with. Ali is beaten very significantly. She would probably have died if someone hadn't come along and stopped the soldiers from booting her to death. She then goes to a hospital where she recovers. This is a prison hospital, so she's in with prisoners from the invaders. It's a lonely, dark time for her, and at this point something happens that I'm not totally cool with in terms of storyline. But from there on, she goes to an actual prison camp. The prison camp is harsh. I think John Marsden has read a lot of history to get it. Some of the stories were very strongly reminiscent of World War II prison camp stories, especially Hellfire Pass in Thailand, where Japanese got Allied soldiers who to build a railway hand by hand, shovelful by shovelful, through Thailand to Burma. There's some horrible stories out of the Second World War, and the convict camps, and I think some of those have been sourced for this, or possibly some of the Holocaust stories. I'm not sure. There's some harsh stuff. It's not told as harshly as it could be, but it's certainly not for the faint-hearted. This is a book I didn't read all the way through. I kept needing to put it down at times because it was pretty harsh to read some of it, and in the meantime there's wars elsewhere in the world that are really happening, and that sort of fed into each other. This was a little bit quite depressing at times and a little bit hard. At the end of it, however, Ellie's in this prison camp. When she arrived, she lied about her name. She said her name was Amber something or other, and she realizes that if they know who she is, it'll be automatic death sentence because she's done so much damage to the enemy. That's all going along well until another prisoner recognizes her and yells out her name in front of the whole camp, and at that stage a prison liaison officer works fast to give her a chance to escape. The way she escapes is also pretty harsh. In the camp hospital, a man has just died of AIDS. Remember, this was written in the early 90s. AIDS was still a big thing. Because he died of AIDS, him and all his belongings were to be burnt immediately, and they smuggle Ellie out in a mattress. She is nearly caught. She is nearly shot and killed. She never finds out what happens to the doctor that helped her escape. We rather suspect he dies. Anyway, while in that camp, she'd found out where her mother was located, and she does this massive cross-country trek to get to see her mother. At around about the time she finds her mother, peace is officially declared. Things get complicated. She does eventually go back home. Now, in this book, more than any of the others, as is right because it's the 7th, we can see that Ellie is suffering mentally and psychologically. She is suffering in every way from the war. She's got beyond PTSD. Because there's no post about it. She's got traumatic stress disorder from day to day. And also she's alone because for the whole war she pretty much hasn't been alone. She's always been in a group of friends. Going back to when she was captured after the train sabotage. The last she saw her friends was when she was running away from the petrol station, which had a major explosion, major conflagration, and the soldiers had sighted her friends. She yelled and ran in one direction. She hoped some of them escaped, but the explosions happened soon after. Now, after she was taken captive following the train, she asks about her friends, and she's told that they've all died, and she believes this. Now, there's a few things in this book that didn't really gel for me. One is that these teenagers, these kids, who are by now extremely proficient little guerrilla soldiers, their sabotage skills are off the scale compared, for example, to the New Zealand crack troops that are being sent in who've learnt about it, but these guys have been doing it. They made a lot of mistakes with the service station. I can swallow that because they'd been told to do their worst and they were focused on that. Also, they'd just survived a couple of other events that sent them a bit off the scale, but none of the precautions that they'd normally have taken were there. None of their after plans, like meet-up plans, were actually there. None of that. I can accept it. In context, as part of the story, it works. But then when Ellie is told that all her friends died in the service station explosion, she just believes it. She's told this by a member of the enemy soldiers who she has no reason to trust, and who later tries to frotterize her, and he's basically saved her in case at the end of the war you have Nuremberg trials type scenario. He wants someone to speak to him. So what he's actually done throughout the war that was horrible is, who knows, but it's probably pretty horrible. He's kept Ellie alive with the intention of having a post-war advocate if he needs it. This isn't someone to trust. And yet she just instantly and automatically believes that all her friends are dead. And again, this is all very spoilery. she believed it. I never did. As a reader, it's impossible to believe this thing that she's believing. And I can see that the John Marsden, the author, is setting us up for the great reveal at the end that they've survived. But it isn't that much of a great reveal to me because I never thought they hadn't. So there was that. In other regards, this is a very, very unsettling book. I was quite unsettled by it. By the end, I couldn't pick up another book. I was restless. It was a hard book to read in many regards. It's a very worthy ending to the series. But while most of these books manage to include something that's a little bit light and a little bit pleasant and a little bit nice, there isn't much that's good and pleasant in this from the last third to the end. And even the end of the war really isn't that great a thing. There's a couple of small things that are nice, but they get back to their town, which has been wrecked, and a lot of people have died, and their farm is returned to them, but most of it's then taken away. So basically, no life has been given them. And what's worse is that the group of people that we have been following throughout this also just sort of collapses into nothing. Ellie and Fee still talk occasionally. The boys don't even do that. This very tight unit that was what carried us through these stories is gone. Now, I think what Marsden was doing was setting it up for the next series. I believe there's another series concentrating on Ellie. I kind of don't want to know. Ellie on her own is not a great character. The fact that she's alone for most of this book works because it highlights the desperation and the loneliness and the misery of the war. But I don't think I really want to read a whole book about that. And from what I've heard about it, it's not very nice. She loses the farm, she's alone, she's desperate. I think I've had enough of that with The Other Side of Dawn. It's actually, yeah. So yeah, it's a good book. It's a worthy end of the series. Talking about the series as a whole, I think it's well worth reading. There's a lot of really beautiful writing in it, and there's a lot, I think, of excellent insights into the war. Now, because I'm probably not going to review the series as a whole, this is my final review of the series, unless someone wants me to review the series as a whole. If so, ask by all means. I want to talk a little bit about the fact that this series was accused of racism and inciting racism when it first came out. I don't know how seriously that was, but the words were bandied around. I disagree, and I think that John Marsden has done an excellent job of avoiding the race issue. Now, these invaders to Australia aren't English, and they're described as being apparently different. Ellie and her friends can't blend in with them. Even Lee, who is a Vietnamese Thai background, it is never suggested that he actually blends in with them. There's also a whole heap of small snippets throughout the books that basically completely eliminate various nationalities as being the target of racism here. It could as well be aliens, except for the political issues of the invasion. At the end, it talks about Japan totally supporting Australia and New Zealand and sending war support. So Japan did not invade. It talks about the fact that Fee has learnt languages. She can speak Mandarin, but she can't understand what the invaders are speaking, so that precludes the Chinese. There's a mention later of someone who'd been to Indonesia and speaks Indonesian, by which I would assume Bahasa Indonesia, and yet they do not understand what these people speak. I think, essentially, Marsden eliminates every single individual country that could be targeted as racist against. He's just created a completely anonymous, they could be green aliens for all we know, except they're not. We know they're generally described as having black hair, but in the final one-on-one combat that Ellie has with one of the last soldiers who isn't aware that the war's over. She talks about the green eyes that she sees as they're falling over the cliff. So you have actually got a conglomerate of things that create an enemy, but not a specific enemy. It basically rules out any specific enemy that you can think of. And I think that was very well done. I do feel that for some people, it may have worked in creating, I don't know, hostility against other, but I don't think that was the aim of the book, and I actually think it gets around doing that quite nicely. Thoroughly recommend these books. I'm not the only one. It's been translated into 5 languages. It was on school curriculum in Victoria and New South Wales, as far as I know. Probably should be in the curriculum of more of Australia. Some of the things I've seen the rural Australian schools getting their teenagers to read, this would be better. Yeah, it's a great series. As young adult dystopian style series go, it's one of the harder ones in many ways, but very well written. Many young adult series don't have this beautiful writing as well as a great theory. I hope you have. If you haven't read it, you can get past all the spoilers I've dropped and read it. And if you have read it, I'd be fascinated to hear what you think. Its time has been and gone. It was written in the early 90s, so it's an older series, but I think it's well worth revisiting. Like, comment, subscribe, that sort of thing.